In the quiet village of St. Mary Mead, a priceless antique globe vanishes from Colonel Rutherford's locked study, sparking a web of suspicion. Enter Miss Jane Marple, whose sharp mind unravels secrets hidden in a manner filled with whispers. From a nervous assistant to a charming guest, a cunning dealer to a secretive scholar, each holds a clue. Wax smudges, hidden passages, a gold cufflink. As motives unravel and a trap is set, Miss Marple reveals the thief in a thrilling climax, proving no secret escapes her gentle gaze. Chapter 1. The Missing Treasure. The morning mist clung to the hedgerows of St. Mary Mead, softening the outlines of Colonel Archibald Rutherford's manor, a rambling Georgian pile draped in ivy and steeped in the quiet dignity of age. The village, with its thatched cottages and single tea shop, rarely stirred with excitement, but today an undercurrent of unease rippled through the manor's oak-paneled halls. Colonel Rutherford, a man whose weathered face bore the lines of distant travels, stood in his study, his hands clasped behind his back, staring at an empty pedestal where his prized possession, an antique globe crafted by Guillaume de Lisle in 1754, should have rested. Its absence was as jarring as a missing tooth, the velvet cushion atop the pedestal bearing only the faintest imprint of its former occupant, a mute witness to a theft. The colonel, his white mustache twitching with agitation, had sent for Miss Jane Marple, that unassuming spinster whose gentle demeanor belied a mind sharper than a sergeant's bayonet. She arrived promptly at 10, her black lace-up shoes clicking softly on the polished floor, her knitting bag slung over one arm like a faithful companion. Her eyes, bright and bird-like, took in the study's details as she crossed the threshold. Shelves groaning under leather-bound tomes, a brass sextant glinting in a shaft of sunlight, maps pinned to the walls like trophies of a cartographer's fever dream. The room smelled of old paper and wax polish, with a faint undertone of pipe tobacco. The empty pedestal stood at the center, an accusation in mahogany. "Good morning, Colonel," Miss Marple said, her voice soft but clear, as if addressing a parish meeting. "A distressing business, I hear." "Distressing?" The colonel's voice was a bark, softened only slightly by his respect for her. "It's a dashed outrage, Miss Marple. That globe, irreplaceable, crafted by de Lisle himself, every meridian hand-drawn, the oceans inked in that peculiar green only he used, worth a king's ransom, and now gone." He gestured at the pedestal, his hand trembling. "Stolen, right under my nose, from a locked room." Miss Marple's eyes flickered to the door, its heavy oak unmarred, the brass lock gleaming with smug integrity. The windows, too, were intact, their latches undisturbed, the sills free of dirt or scuff marks. She stepped closer to the pedestal, her gloved fingers brushing the velvet cushion. "No dust disturbed," she murmured, almost to herself. The thief was careful, or familiar with this room. The colonel paced, his boots thudding on the Persian rug. "I've racked my brains, Miss Marple. Only 4 people could have had the chance. My assistant, Harold Finch, he's been with me years, but he's an odd fish, always scribbling in his notebooks. Then there's Lady Beatrice Langley, a guest staying for the week, charming but sharp as a tack. Victor Crane, an antique dealer, was here yesterday, eyeing the globe like a hawk, and Dr. Evelyn Morrow, a scholar from Oxford, poking about my collection for her research. All here last night, all with access to the hall outside this study." Miss Marple nodded, settling into a leather armchair, her knitting needles emerging from her bag with a soft clink. "And the key to this room?" she asked, her tone as mild as a summer breeze. "With me," the colonel said, patting his waistcoat pocket. "Always is. Locked the study myself at 8 last night after showing the globe to Dr. Morrow. Checked it again at midnight before bed. Still there. This morning, 7 o'clock, I found it gone." His voice cracked. "No one else has a key, Miss Marple. No one." Her needles clicked rhythmically, a metronome to her thoughts. "A locked room, yet a thief slipped through," she said softly. "It reminds me of old Mrs. Hargreaves's silver teapot, you know, vanished from a locked pantry, but the culprit was closer than anyone thought." She smiled faintly, her eyes scanning the room again. The bookcase, slightly askew, the candle on the desk, its wick blackened, the faint scratch on the floor near the hearth. "Tell me, Colonel, did anyone linger near the study last night?" He frowned, rubbing his chin. "Can't say for certain. Dinner was at 6. Lively affair. Lady Beatrice holding court. Crane talking shop. Morrow quiet as a mouse. Finch was in and out fetching papers. After that, they scattered, reading, writing, what have you. I was in my library until midnight." Miss Marple's needles paused. "And this globe? Its value was well known?" "Too well," the colonel growled. "Crane offered me 10,000 for it last year. I refused. Said it was a family heirloom, not for sale, but anyone with eyes could see its worth." "Indeed," Miss Marple said, her gaze settling on the pedestal once more. "A treasure like that tempts many hearts. Greed, curiosity, desperation, they all leave traces." She rose, her movements deliberate, and crossed to the window, peering at the garden beyond. The rose bushes were pristine, the gravel path unraked. "I shall need to speak with each of them, Colonel. People, you see, are like my knitting. Pull one thread, and the pattern unravels." The colonel managed a grim nod. "Do what you must, Miss Marple. Find my globe, and I'll be in your debt." As she stepped into the hall, her eyes caught a glint of something under a side table. A single pearl bead, small and out of place. She bent to retrieve it, turning it in her fingers. "Curious," she murmured, tucking it into her pocket. The manor was silent, but its walls seemed to hum with secrets, and Miss Marple knew that somewhere within them lay the truth about the vanished antique globe. Chapter 2. The Assistant's Tale. The morning sun had burned away the mist over St. Mary Mead, leaving the air crisp and the manor's gardens ablaze with late summer roses. Miss Jane Marple, her knitting bag tucked under her arm, made her way to the library where Harold Finch, Colonel Rutherford's assistant, was said to spend most of his hours. The library was a cavernous room, its high ceilings lost in shadow, its walls lined with bookshelves that sagged under the weight of centuries-old volumes. A long oak table dominated the center, strewn with maps, ledgers, and a battered typewriter, its keys worn from use. The air carried the musty scent of old paper, mingled with the faint tang of ink. Harold Finch stood at the far end, hunched over a pile of manuscripts, his thin frame almost swallowed by a tweed jacket too large for him. His hair, prematurely gray, was disheveled, and his fingers, stained black with ink, fidgeted with a pencil. He started as Miss Marple entered, his eyes darting to her before settling on the floor. "Mr. Finch," she said, her voice as gentle as a vicar's at tea. "I hope I'm not interrupting your work." No, not at all," he stammered, pushing his glasses up his nose. Just cataloging. The Colonel's collection. It's endless." His hands moved nervously, stacking papers that didn't need stacking. Miss Marple settled into a chair near the table, her needles emerging from her bag with their familiar click. "A daunting task, I'm sure," she said, her eyes kind but unyielding. "The Colonel speaks highly of your diligence. You must know this manor and its treasures better than most." Harold's shoulders tensed and he gave a quick nod. "I suppose so. Been here 5 years. Maps, mostly. The Colonel's fond of them. I keep them organized, cross-reference provenances, that sort of thing." His voice was clipped, as if each word cost him effort. Miss Marple's needles moved steadily, the soft rhythm a counterpoint to his unease. "And the globe? The one that's gone missing? You've handled it, I presume?" His fingers froze on the pencil, and a flush crept up his neck. "Handled it? Well, yes, now and then. To dust it, or move it for the Colonel's displays. It's delicate, you know. Old parchment, brass fittings, not something you touch carelessly." He glanced at her, then away, as if the bookshelves held some urgent secret. "Quite so," Miss Marple said, her tone as light as a summer breeze. "And last night, the Colonel mentioned you were here, in the library, cataloging. All evening?" Harold nodded too quickly. "Yes, all evening. After dinner I came here, worked until, 11, maybe midnight. Locked the manor doors at 9, as always. Didn't see anything odd." His words tumbled out a little too rehearsed, and his eyes flicked to the window, where the garden lay still under the morning light. Miss Marple's needles paused, just for a moment. "Alone, were you? It must get quiet working so late. No one came by? No visitors to the library?" "No one," he said, his voice firm but his hands betraying him, twisting the pencil until it snapped. He stared at the broken halves, startled, then shoved them into his pocket. "I mean, it's always quiet, just me and the books." She smiled, the kind of smile that made one feel both comforted and exposed. "You're fond of maps, Mr. Finch. I noticed your notebook there, quite detailed sketches, almost like an artist's." He flushed again, deeper this time, and pushed the notebook under a pile of papers. "Just notes," he muttered. "Helps me keep track. The Colonel's collection is complicated." He hesitated, then added, "I don't draw for pleasure, if that's what you mean." "Oh, I'm sure you don't," Miss Marple said, her tone soothing. "But a man with your eye for detail must notice things others miss. Tell me, did you notice anything unusual last night? A sound, perhaps? A door creaking, or footsteps in the hall?" Harold's eyes narrowed, and for a moment he seemed to weigh his words. "Nothing," he said at last. "Just the usual creaks of an old house. The wind, maybe. I was focused on my work." He gestured vaguely at the table, where a ledger lay open, its pages filled with neat, cramped handwriting. Miss Marple leaned forward slightly, her eyes never leaving his face. "And the study? You didn't go near it? The Colonel said you have access to most rooms for your cataloging." "I didn't go near it," he said sharply, then softened his tone. "I mean, there was no need. The Colonel keeps the study locked and I don't have a key. Never have." His fingers drummed on the table, a nervous tattoo. She nodded, as if satisfied, though her mind was far from settled. "Of course, a man as busy as you wouldn't have time to wander, though I wonder." She trailed off, her needles resuming their rhythm. "The globe is such a curious thing to steal. Heavy, cumbersome, not easily hidden. Whoever took it must have known its value, and the manor's ways." Harold swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing. "I wouldn't know about that. I just do my job." He turned back to his papers, but his hands shook slightly, betraying the calm he tried to project. Miss Marple rose, tucking her knitting back into her bag. "You've been most helpful, Mr. Finch. I shan't keep you from your work." She paused at the door, her eyes catching a smudge of ink on the cuff of his shirt, stark against the faded tweed. "Oh, one last thing," she said, almost as an afterthought. "You locked the manor doors at 9, you said. Did you check the garden door, the one near the study?" His face paled, just for a moment before he recovered. "The garden door? Yes, I think so. I check all the doors. Routine, you know." But his voice faltered, and his eyes darted to the side, as if searching for an escape. "Thank you, Mr. Finch," Miss Marple said, her smile as gentle as ever. "I'm sure we'll speak again." She stepped into the hall, her mind turning over the conversation like a jeweler inspecting a flawed gem. Harold Finch was nervous. That much was clear. But was it the guilt of a thief or the fear of a man out of his depth? She thought of her nephew's clerk, young Tommy, who had once fidgeted just so when caught pilfering biscuits from the vicarage tea tray. Innocence could mimic guilt, but so could cunning. As she walked down the hall, her eyes fell on a small table near the library door, its surface cluttered with a vase of wilting roses and a brass paperweight. Beneath it, half hidden by the table's shadow, was a scrap of paper, crumpled and overlooked. She bent to retrieve it, her movements slow and deliberate, and smoothed it out in her gloved hand. It was a torn page from a notebook, covered in precise, almost obsessive sketches of a globe. Not just any globe, but one with the distinctive outlines of Delisle's work, complete with annotations on its brass fittings and parchment texture. The handwriting matched the ledger she'd glimpsed on Harold's table. "Curious," she murmured, slipping the paper into her pocket beside the pearl bead from the study. Harold Finch, it seemed, had more than a passing interest in the missing globe. But was he a thief, or merely a man too curious for his own good? She thought of the village schoolmaster, Mr. Pettigrew, who had once hoarded books from the lending library, not to steal, but to study them in secret. People, she knew, could be driven by desires they scarcely admitted to themselves. The manor's halls were quiet, but the air seemed to hum with unspoken truths. Miss Marple made her way to the drawing-room, where she hoped to find Lady Beatrice Langley, the next thread in this tangled skein. As she passed a window, she glanced at the garden, where the gravel path lay undisturbed, save for a single footprint near the rose bushes, a footprint too large for Harold's narrow boots. Her lips curved in a faint smile. The manor was telling its story, one clue at a time, and Miss Marple was listening. She paused at the drawing-room door, her hand resting lightly on the knob. Harold Finch's nervousness, his ink-stained fingers, the torn sketch, these were pieces of a puzzle, but not yet the picture. She thought of the old vicarage clock, which had once stopped at midnight, not because it was broken, but because someone had wound it too tightly. Harold, she suspected, was wound just as tight, and the question was why. Greed? Fear? Or something else entirely? As she stepped into the drawing-room, her needles tucked safely in her bag, Miss Marple felt the familiar thrill of the chase. The vanished antique globe was more than a stolen treasure. It was a key to the secrets of those who coveted it, and she was determined to turn that key. Chapter 3. The Guest's Charm. The drawing-room of Colonel Rutherford's manor was a study in faded elegance, its high windows draped in heavy damask curtains, that filtered the midday sun into a soft, golden haze. A grand fireplace, its mantel adorned with porcelain figurines, dominated one wall, while a rosewood table held a silver tea service that gleamed with the patina of frequent use. The air carried the faint scent of lavender and beeswax, a testament to the manor's meticulous upkeep. Miss Jane Marple entered quietly, her black lace-up shoes whispering across the polished floor, her knitting bag a familiar weight on her arm. She had come to speak with Lady Beatrice Langley, the Colonel's guest, whose reputation for charm preceded her like a fanfare. Lady Beatrice reclined on a velvet chaise, a vision in emerald silk, her auburn hair swept into an elegant chignon that accentuated her sharp cheekbones. She was leafing through a fashion magazine, her movements languid, but her eyes flicked up as Miss Marple approached, assessing her with the precision of a jeweler appraising a stone. "Miss Marple, is it?" she said, her voice a melodic drawl, tinged with the faintest hint of amusement. "The Colonel mentioned you'd be poking about. Such a dreadful business, this stolen globe." She set the magazine aside, her fingers lingering on its glossy pages, and gestured to a chair. "Do sit. Tea?" Miss Marple settled into the offered seat, her needles emerging with their customary click. "Thank you, Lady Beatrice, but I've just had my morning cup. I shan't keep you long. I'm merely trying to understand what happened last night." Lady Beatrice's lips curved into a smile, both warm and calculated. "Of course. A proper little mystery, isn't it? Like something out of a novel. I do adore a puzzle, though I'm afraid I'm not much use at solving them." She leaned forward, her emerald earrings catching the light. "I was in my suite all evening, you see, after that rather tedious dinner. Reading, mostly. Trollope, if you must know. Such a comfort on a dull night." Miss Marple's eyes, mild but unyielding, noted the way Lady Beatrice's fingers toyed with a pearl bracelet, the beads clicking softly against each other. "Trollope is indeed a comfort," she said, her tone as gentle as a parish knit and natter. "You retired early, then? No visits to the study, or perhaps a stroll in the hall?" "Oh, heavens, no," Lady Beatrice said, her laugh a delicate chime. "I'm not one for wandering old houses at night. Too many creaks and shadows for my taste." She paused, tilting her head as if struck by a sudden thought. "Though I did see that scholar, Dr. Morrow, is it? Hovering near the study door when I passed by after dinner. She had that look, you know, like someone with a secret. Not that I'm one to gossip." Her smile suggested otherwise, a spark of mischief in her eyes. Miss Marple's needles moved steadily, the soft rhythm a counterpoint to the room's quiet opulence. "Doctor? Morrow, you say? How curious. And what time was this?" Lady Beatrice waved a hand airily. "Oh, 8 or so. I didn't check my watch. I was on my way upstairs, and there she was, standing by the study, clutching that notebook of hers. Looked rather furtive, if you ask me." She leaned back, her posture relaxed, but her gaze sharp. "Mind you, I don't trust those academic types, always poking into things that don't concern them." Miss Marple nodded, as if merely acknowledging a neighbor's opinion on the weather. "You've a keen eye, Lady Beatrice. Did you notice anyone else near the study? Mr. Finch, perhaps? Or Mr. Crane?" "Finch? That nervous little man?" Lady Beatrice's lips pursed as if tasting something sour. "He was scurrying about with his papers as usual. I saw him in the hall earlier, fussing over a tray of coffee for the Colonel. As for Mr. Crane, he was at dinner, prattling on about antiques. Dreadful bore, but harmless, I'd say." She paused, her fingers stilling on the bracelet. Or perhaps not. Dealers like him always have an eye for profit, don't they? Indeed, Miss Marple said, her voice soft but her mind alert. And you, Lady Beatrice? You've stayed here before, I understand. The Colonel's collection must be familiar to you. Lady Beatrice's smile tightened, just for a moment. Oh, I've seen his trinkets, yes. Globes, maps, dusty old things. The Colonel loves showing them off. That globe, though, quite the prize. I remember him boasting about its value last year. 10,000, he said, and that was a low estimate. She sighed, a touch too theatrically. Such a shame it's gone. He'll be heartbroken. Miss Marple's needles paused, her eyes resting on Lady Beatrice's bracelet. One pearl was missing, its empty clasp glinting in the light. A shame, indeed, she said. You mentioned passing the study. Did you happen to notice the door? Whether it was open, or perhaps ajar? Lady Beatrice's brow furrowed, as if the question surprised her. Closed, I think. Yes, definitely closed. The Colonel's so particular about that room, always locking it, as if we're all thieves. She laughed again, but it was thinner this time, less certain. Miss Marple smiled, her expression as benign as a Sunday sermon. Quite right. Old houses do encourage caution, though I wonder. She trailed off, her gaze drifting to the window, where the garden lay in serene order, the rose bushes casting long shadows. The manor has so many doors, the garden door, for instance. Near the study, did you pass it on your way upstairs? Lady Beatrice's fingers tightened on her bracelet, a fleeting gesture. The garden door? I wouldn't know. I took the main staircase. I don't go poking about in back passages. Her tone was light, but there was an edge to it, like a blade wrapped in silk. Of course, Miss Marple said, her needles resuming their rhythm. You strike me as a woman who notices things, though. People, their habits. You must have formed some impressions of the others here. Lady Beatrice leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with the delight of shared confidences. Well, since you ask, Harold Finch is a bundle of nerves, always twitching like a mouse in a cat's shadow. Dr. Morrow's too serious, always scribbling in that notebook, probably plotting something clever. And Mr. Crane? All charm and no substance. He's the sort who'd sell his own grandmother if the price was right. She paused, her smile sly. But don't quote me, Miss Marple. I'm only a guest, after all. Miss Marple chuckled softly, as if at a village anecdote. Your discretion is noted, Lady Beatrice. Though I find people often reveal more than they intend, don't you? Like my friend Mrs. Bantry's gardener, who once let slip about a missing spade because he couldn't stop talking about his roses. She rose, tucking her knitting into her bag. You've been most helpful. I shan't take more of your time. Lady Beatrice's smile was gracious, but her eyes followed Miss Marple to the door, sharp and calculating. Do let me know if you find that globe, she called. I'd hate for the Colonel to lose such a treasure. As Miss Marple stepped into the hall, her mind turned over the conversation like a seamstress examining a quilt for flaws. Lady Beatrice was all polish and poise, but there was a brittleness beneath her charm, like porcelain too often handled. The missing pearl from her bracelet nagged at Miss Marple's thoughts, recalling the bead she'd found in the study. Coincidence, perhaps, but Miss Marple had little faith in coincidences. She thought of Miss Elspeth from the village, whose flirtatious chatter had once masked a deeper motive, a loan she couldn't repay. Lady Beatrice's gossip about Dr. Morrow felt deliberate, a deflection, perhaps, or a way to cast suspicion elsewhere. The hall was quiet, its polished floor reflecting the light from a chandelier above. Miss Marple paused by a small console table, its surface bare save for a vases of lilies. Beneath it, caught in a crack in the wood, was a thread of green silk, the same shade as Lady Beatrice's dress. She plucked it free, turning it in her fingers. "Interesting," she murmured, slipping it into her pocket beside the pearl bead and Harold's sketch. The manor was a tapestry of clues, each thread leading to another, and Lady Beatrice, with her sharp eyes and sharper tongue, was woven into it more deeply than she admitted. Miss Marple glanced toward the garden door, visible at the end of the hall. It was ajar, just enough to let a breeze stir the air. She made a mental note to examine it later, for a door left open in a house of secrets was no small matter. As she moved toward the staircase, her thoughts returned to Lady Beatrice's words about Dr. Morrow, a scholar with a notebook lingering near the study. Another piece of the puzzle, but one that needed testing. The vanished antique globe was pulling at the threads of the manor's inhabitants, and Miss Marple, with her quiet persistence, was determined to follow them to the truth. Chapter 4. The Dealer's Motive. The afternoon light slanted through the tall windows of Colonel Rutherford's manor, casting long shadows across the polished floors of the morning room, where Miss Jane Marple had arranged to meet Victor Crane, the antique dealer. The room, less grand than the drawing room but no less elegant, was furnished with a walnut table, a pair of wing-back chairs, and a glass-fronted cabinet, displaying a collection of ivory carvings. The air held a faint trace of cigar smoke, a reminder of the Colonel's occasional indulgences. Miss Marple settled into one of the chairs, her knitting bag at her side, her needles already clicking in a rhythm as steady as a heartbeat. She had learned much from Harold Finch's nervous deflections and Lady Beatrice's calculated charm, but Victor Crane, she suspected, would be a different sort of puzzle, a man whose polish might conceal sharper edges. Mr. Crane entered with the confidence of a man accustomed to closing deals, his tailored suit immaculate, his pencil mustache trimmed to perfection. He was in his late 40s, with dark hair slicked back and eyes that gleamed with the alertness of a fox. He carried a slim leather portfolio, which he set on the table with a practiced flourish. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice smooth as polished oak. "A pleasure to meet you, though I wish it were under happier circumstances. The Colonel's loss is a tragedy for any collector." He took the opposite chair, crossing his legs with an air of ease that seemed just a shade too deliberate. "Thank you for sparing the time." "Mr. Crane," Miss Marple said, her tone as mild as a village tea party. "I understand you're a man who knows the value of things, particularly fine things, like the Colonel's globe." Crane's smile was quick, revealing teeth that were just a touch too white. "Indeed, the Delisle globe is a masterpiece, 1754, handcrafted, with cartographic details that are frankly unparalleled for its time. I offered the Colonel a tidy sum for it last year, but he's a sentimental sort. Wouldn't part with it." He leaned back, his fingers drumming lightly on the armrest. "A pity it's gone. A piece like that belongs in a museum, not a thief's hands." Miss Marple's needles moved steadily, her eyes resting on his face with a gentle scrutiny. "You saw it only days ago, I believe. The Colonel mentioned you were here to appraise it." "Yes, last Tuesday," Crane said, his tone brisk. Routine visit. The Colonel likes to keep his valuations current for insurance purposes. I spent an hour in the study, examining the globe and a few other pieces, a sextant, a set of nautical charts. All in order, I assure you. He opened his portfolio, producing a neatly typed report, which he slid across the table. My notes, if you're curious. The globe was in pristine condition. Miss Marple glanced at the report, her eyes noting the precise figures and dry prose. Very thorough, she said. And last night? Where were you when the globe vanished? Crane's smile didn't waver, but his fingers paused in their drumming. In London, I'm afraid. Business dinner with a client, a collector of Renaissance bronzes. I caught the 6:15 train from St. Mary Mead and didn't return until this morning. He reached into his jacket and produced a train ticket stub, creased but legible, and placed it beside the report. Proof, if you need it. Miss Marple's needles paused, just for a moment, as she leaned forward to examine the stub. The 6:15, she murmured. That would get you to London by 8, I suppose. Plenty of time for a dinner. And your client would confirm this? Of course, Crane said, his voice as smooth as ever. Mr. Reginald Holt, of Holt & Sons Antiques. We dined at the Savoy until nearly 11. I stayed at my club overnight and took the early train back. He adjusted his cufflinks, gold and gleaming, as if to underscore his impeccable credentials. Miss Marple nodded, her expression as placid as a Sunday morning. You've a busy life, Mr. Crane, traveling, appraising, dealing. You must see many treasures and many temptations. His laugh was quick, almost too quick, like a door slammed shut. Temptations? Oh, I'm tempted every day, Miss Marple. A rare manuscript here, a gilded clock there. But I'm a businessman, not a thief. My reputation depends on trust. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing slightly. If I were to hazard a guess, I'd look at that assistant Finch, shifty fellow, always lurking about. Or perhaps the scholar. Dr. Morrow, is it? She was awfully keen on the globe when I saw her last week, kept asking about its provenance, as if she had plans for it. Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm, the soft click filling the silence. Dr. Morrow, yes. Lady Beatrice mentioned seeing her near the study last night. You've a good memory for details, Mr. Crane. Did you notice anything else during your visit? Anything out of place in the study, perhaps? Crane's brow furrowed, as if the question caught him off guard. Out of place? No, everything was as it should be. The Colonel keeps that room like a vault, locked tight, no clutter. Though, he hesitated, then shrugged. There was a candle on the desk, half burned. Odd, since the room has electric lights. I didn't think much of it at the time. A candle, Miss Marple said, her tone as light as a breeze. How curious. The Colonel rarely uses them, I understand. Did you see anyone else near the study during your visit? Crane shook his head. Just the Colonel and Finch earlier in the day. Finch was carrying a stack of papers, muttering to himself. The Colonel was in high spirits, showing off his collection. Lady Beatrice popped in briefly to say hello, but she didn't stay. As for Dr. Morrow, I saw her in the library, nose buried in a book. He smiled, a touch too broadly. A quiet bunch on the whole. Miss Marple's eyes flickered to his portfolio, where a corner of a map protruded, its edges yellowed with age. You deal in maps as well, Mr. Crane? The Colonel's collection must be a gold mine for a man of your expertise. Oh, it is, he said, his enthusiasm genuine for the first time. His charts are exquisite, 16th century portolains, Dutch engravings. I've offered to broker a few, but he's stubborn, wants to keep them all, like a dragon hoarding gold." He caught himself, his smile tightening. "Not that I'd press him. My job is to advise, not to covet." "Of course," Miss Marple said, her voice as gentle as a lullaby. "Though I imagine a piece like the Delisle globe would fetch a fine price. You must know buyers who'd leap at the chance." Crane's eyes narrowed, just a fraction, before his smile returned. "Plenty, Miss Marple. Collectors in Paris, New York, even Shanghai. But I'd never handle stolen goods. Bad for business." He tapped the table lightly, as if to punctuate his point. Miss Marple rose, tucking her knitting into her bag. "You've been most helpful, Mr. Crane. I shan't keep you from your work." She paused at the door, her eyes catching a faint smudge on his portfolio. A trace of wax, the same shade as the candle in the study. "Oh, one last thing," she said, almost as an afterthought. "The garden door, near the study. Did you notice it during your visit? Whether it was locked, perhaps?" Crane's smile faltered, just for a moment. "The garden door? Can't say I did. I came in through the front hall, as always. Never went near the back of the house." His tone was firm, but his fingers tightened on the portfolio, betraying a flicker of unease. "Thank you, Mr. Crane," Miss Marple said, her smile as serene as ever. She stepped into the hall, her mind turning over the conversation like a gardener sifting soil. Victor Crane was all polish and poise, but there was a crack in his facade, the wax on his portfolio, the too quick alibi, the eagerness to point fingers at Finch and Dr. Morrow. She thought of Mr. Hodges, the village jeweler, who had once sold a stolen brooch and claimed it was a mistake, his charm masking a deeper greed. Crane's train ticket was convenient, but the 6:15 to London left, plenty of time to return by a later train, or even a car. As she passed the garden door, still slightly ajar, she paused to examine it. The lock was old but intact, with no signs of tampering. Yet the gravel path outside bore a faint scuff, as if someone had stepped carelessly. She crouched, her eyes catching a glint in the grass. A cufflink, gold like Crane's, half buried near the rose bushes. She slipped it into her pocket beside the pearl bead, the silk thread, and Harold's sketch. "Interesting," she murmured, her mind weaving the clues into a pattern that was not yet complete. Victor Crane was a man who knew the value of things, and perhaps the value of secrets. His alibi was tidy, but tidiness could be a mask, as Miss Marple had learned from Mrs. Carter's perfectly kept accounts, which had hidden a small fortune in pilfered funds. The dealer's motive was clear, profit, but the how and when of the theft remained elusive. As she made her way toward the garden to find Dr. Morrow, Miss Marple's needles remained in her bag, but her thoughts were as sharp as their points, ready to unravel the next thread in the mystery of the vanished antique globe. Chapter 5. The Scholar's Secret. The garden of Colonel Rutherford's manor was a haven of order, its rose bushes pruned to perfection, its gravel paths raked into precise lines that spoke of a gardener's devotion. The late afternoon sun bathed the scene in a warm, amber glow, softening the edges of the yew hedges and casting dappled shadows on the lawn. Miss Jane Marple, her knitting bag slung over her arm, stepped out through the garden door, her eyes scanning the orderly beds for Dr. Evelyn Morrow, the visiting scholar whose fascination with the stolen globe had been noted by more than one suspect. The air was heavy with the scent of roses and damp earth, and a faint breeze stirred the leaves, carrying with it the distant hum of village life beyond the manor's walls. Dr. Morrow stood near a stone bench, her slight figure almost lost in a tweed skirt and a sensible cardigan, her dark hair pulled into a severe bun. She was sketching in a leather-bound notebook, her pencil moving with the precision of a surgeon. Her glasses, perched low on her nose, glinted as she glanced up at Miss Marple's approach, her expression wary but not unwelcoming. "Miss Marple," she said, her voice clipped and academic. "I was told you'd want a word. About the globe, I presume?" "Indeed, Dr. Morrow," Miss Marple said, her tone as gentle as a vicar's blessing. She settled onto the bench, her needles emerging with their familiar click, a sound as comforting as it was relentless. "It's a troubling matter, the Colonel's loss. I understand you spent time with the globe recently. You must feel its absence keenly." Dr. Morrow's lips tightened, and she closed her notebook with a snap. "Keenly? Perhaps. It's a remarkable piece, Delisle's work, 1754, with cartographic errors, that reveals so much about the era's understanding of the world. I was studying it for my monograph on 18th century map-making. Its loss is inconvenient." Her fingers lingered on the notebook, as if reluctant to let it go. Miss Marple's eyes, mild but piercing, noted the faint tremor in Dr. Morrow's hand. "Inconvenient, yes," she said, her needles moving steadily. "You were in the study yesterday afternoon, I believe? The Colonel mentioned you were examining the globe." "Yes," Dr. Morrow said, her tone brisk. "From 2 until 4. The Colonel was kind enough to let me sketch it. I made detailed notes. Its parchment, the brass meridian ring, the faded inscriptions, all invaluable for my research." She opened her notebook briefly, revealing pages filled with meticulous drawings, the globe's contours rendered with almost obsessive care. "I left the study when the Colonel did, and he locked it behind us." Miss Marple nodded, her gaze lingering on a smudge of wax on Dr. Morrow's cuff, a pale yellow that matched the candle in the study. "You're very thorough," she said, her voice as soft as a summer breeze. "And last night? After dinner, where were you?" Dr. Morrow's eyes flickered just for a moment before she answered. "In my room, writing up my notes. I retired early, around 8, I think. Scholarly work demands focus, and the manor's quiet at night." She adjusted her glasses, her movements precise but tinged with unease. "I heard nothing unusual, if that's what you're asking." "Of course," Miss Marple said, her needles never faltering. "Though Lady Beatrice mentioned seeing you near the study around that time, perhaps you stepped out for a breath of air?" Dr. Morrow's jaw tightened, and a flush crept up her cheeks. "Lady Beatrice is mistaken," she said sharply. "I was in my room. I have no reason to skulk about the study. My work with the globe was done." She clutched her notebook closer, as if it were a shield. Miss Marple's smile was as gentle as ever, but her mind was alert, sifting through the scholar's words. "No reason at all," she said. "Though I imagine a piece like the globe could be a temptation for someone with your passion. Not for profit, perhaps, but for study. I recall Miss Hargreaves from the village, who once borrowed a rare book from the vicarage library and kept it far too long, simply because she couldn't bear to part with it." Dr. Morrow's eyes narrowed. "I'm not a thief, Miss Marple. My interest is academic, not possessive. The globe's value lies in its historical significance, not in owning it." Her voice was firm, but her fingers betrayed her, twisting a loose thread on her cardigan. Miss Marple's needles paused, her gaze resting on the wax smudge. "You worked by candlelight, perhaps?" "The study's electric lights are quite modern, but I noticed a candle there, recently used." Dr. Morrow blinked, caught off guard. "Candlelight?" "No, I used the desk lamp. The candle was there when I arrived, but I didn't touch it. The colonel must have lit it at some point." Her tone was defensive, and she shifted on the bench, her notebook slipping slightly to reveal a page with a sketch of the study's layout, including the bookcase near the hidden panel. "How curious," Miss Marple said, her voice as light as a feather. "The colonel rarely uses candles, he says. Did you notice anything else in the study? Anything out of place?" Dr. Morrow hesitated, her eyes darting to the garden path. "Nothing significant. The room was tidy, as always. The colonel's meticulous. Though—" She paused, as if weighing her words. "There was a draft, now that I think of it, near the bookcase. I thought a window was open, but they were all latched." Her brow furrowed, as if the memory puzzled her. "A draft," Miss Marple murmured, her mind turning to the hidden panel she'd discovered. "Most interesting. And did you see anyone else near the study yesterday? Mr. Finch, perhaps? Or Mr. Crane?" Dr. Morrow shook her head. "Mr. Crane was there earlier, with the colonel, but I didn't see him after lunch. Finch was in the library, as usual, muttering over his papers. I try to avoid him. He's so jumpy, it's distracting." She paused, then added, "Lady Beatrice stopped by the study briefly to chat with the colonel. She didn't stay long, but she seemed curious about the globe. Kept asking about its value." Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm, the soft click blending with the rustle of leaves. "Lady Beatrice does have a lively interest in things," she said. "You've been most helpful, Dr. Morrow. I shan't keep you from your work." As she rose, her eyes caught a glint in the grass near the bench, a small brass button, its surface etched with a faint nautical design, unlike anything Dr. Morrow wore. She bent to retrieve it, slipping it into her pocket beside the pearl bead, the silk thread, the cufflink, and Harold's sketch. "One last thing," she said, turning back to Dr. Morrow. "The garden door near the study. Did you pass it last night on your way to your room?" Dr. Morrow's expression hardened. "Number I took the main staircase. I had no reason to go near the garden." Her voice was steady, but her fingers tightened on her notebook, betraying a flicker of unease. "Thank you, Dr. Morrow," Miss Marple said, her smile as serene as a summer's day. She turned toward the manor, her mind weaving the scholar's words into the growing tapestry of clues. Dr. Morrow's passion for the globe was clear, but was it purely academic, or did it mask a deeper desire? The wax on her cuff, the sketch of the study's layout, the mention of a draft, these were threads that pointed to opportunity, if not motive. Miss Marple thought of Miss Elspeth's cousin, a quiet librarian, who had once hidden a rare manuscript in her attic, not to sell, but to keep it close. Scholars, she knew, could be as possessive as collectors. As she reached the garden door, she paused to examine it again. The scuff on the gravel was still there, joined now by a faint smear of dirt, as if someone had brushed against the threshold. She crouched, her eyes catching a tiny scrap of paper caught in the door's hinge, a fragment with a single word in Dr. Morrow's precise handwriting. Meridian. Miss Marple tucked it into her pocket, her lips curving in a faint smile. The manor was a puzzle, its pieces scattered among its inhabitants, and Dr. Morrow, with her secrets and her sketches, was a piece that didn't quite fit. Yet. She glanced back at the garden, where Dr. Morrow had resumed her sketching, her head bent over her notebook. The scholar's composure was admirable, but Miss Marple knew that composure could hide as much as it revealed. As she stepped into the manor, her thoughts turned to the hidden panel in the study, the candle's wax, and the growing collection of clues in her pocket. The vanished antique globe was drawing her deeper into the manor's secrets, and Miss Marple, with her quiet persistence, was ready to follow the trail wherever it led. Chapter 6. The Study's Secrets. The late afternoon light filtered through the manor's leaded windows, casting intricate patterns across the oak-paneled walls of Colonel Rutherford's study. The room, with its heavy bookcases and faded maps, seemed to hold its breath, as if guarding the secrets of the vanished antique globe. Miss Jane Marple stood alone in the center, her knitting bag resting on a leather armchair, her eyes tracing the contours of the space where the Delisle globe had once stood. The empty pedestal, its velvet cushion slightly askew, was a silent accusation, and the air carried a faint whiff of old parchment and wax, undercut by the sharper tang of polish. She had spoken with Harold Finch, Lady Beatrice, Victor Crane, and Dr. Morrow, each offering a piece of the puzzle. But the study itself, she knew, held clues that words alone could not reveal. Miss Marple moved slowly, her black lace-up shoes silent on the Persian rug, her gaze methodical. The oak door, stout and unyielding, bore a modern brass lock, its surface unmarred by scratches or dents. She tested the handle, finding it firm, confirming the colonel's claim that only his key could open it. The windows, tall and narrow, were latched securely, their sills free of dust or disturbance, ruling out entry from the garden. Yet the theft had happened, and the globe, cumbersome, delicate, unmistakable, had vanished without a trace. "A locked room," she murmured, her voice as soft as a prayer. "But locks are only as good as those who keep them." Her eyes fell on the bookcase, its shelves groaning under the weight of leather-bound volumes and rolled maps. It stood slightly askew, a hair's breadth off alignment with the wall. She stepped closer, her gloved fingers brushing the polished wood, and noticed a faint scratch on the floor, a crescent-shaped mark that suggested movement. With a gentle push, she tested the bookcase, feeling it give under her touch. A soft click echoed, and a panel slid aside, revealing a narrow passage, its stone walls cool and damp, leading toward the garden. "Well, well," she said, her lips curving in a faint smile. A secret door, just like old Mr. Grayson's attic, where he hid his smuggled brandy. She peered into the passage, noting its low ceiling and the faint scuff of footprints in the dust, too indistinct to identify, but proof that someone had passed through recently. The passage ended at a small door, half hidden by ivy, opening onto the garden path near the rose bushes. Miss Marple stepped back, her mind racing. The colonel had sworn the passage was a relic of the manor's past, known only to him, and perhaps Harold Finch, who had catalogued the house's blueprints. But knowledge, she knew, had a way of spreading, like gossip in St. Mary Mead's tea shop. Returning to the study, she examined the pedestal more closely. The velvet cushion bore a faint imprint of the globe's base, but there was something else, a tiny splinter of wood caught in the fabric, its grain different from the mahogany pedestal. She plucked it free, holding it to the light. "Not from here," she murmured, slipping it into her pocket beside the pearl bead, the silk thread, the cufflink, the brass button, and the scrap of paper with Dr. Morrow's handwriting. The splinter suggested the globe had been moved with care, perhaps wrapped or crated, to avoid damage. A thief with such foresight was no amateur. Her gaze shifted to the desk, where a single candle stood, its wax pooled in a pale yellow puddle, the wick blackened from recent use. The colonel had insisted he rarely lit it, preferring the electric lamp that hung overhead. Miss Marple leaned closer, noting a faint smear of wax on the desk's edge, matching the smudge on Dr. Morrow's cuff and Victor Crane's portfolio. "Someone worked here after dark," she said softly, "and not by lamplight." The candle's presence was a puzzle, for the study's electric lights were reliable, and a thief would hardly risk a flame unless necessary. She thought of Mrs. Bantry's maid, who had once used a candle to search for a lost brooch, only to leave telltale drippings that betrayed her. Miss Marple circled the room, her eyes catching every detail. A map pinned to the wall, its corner slightly curled. A brass sextant, polished to a gleam but slightly off-center. A faint smudge on the window pane, as if someone had pressed a hand against it. She paused by the bookcase, again running her fingers along its edge, and found a single hair, fine, dark, and curled, caught in a splinter. It was too short for Lady Beatrice's auburn tresses, too dark for Harold's gray strands, and unlikely to belong to Dr. Morrow, whose hair was pinned tightly. Victor Crane, perhaps? Or someone else entirely? She added it to her collection of clues, her mind weaving a pattern that was still incomplete. The colonel's voice broke her reverie as he entered, his mustache bristling with impatience. "Well, Miss Marple, found anything? This business is driving me to distraction." He gestured at the empty pedestal, his face flushed with indignation. "A few things, Colonel," she said, her tone as calm as a summer's day. "This passage, for one." She indicated the hidden panel, now closed but unmistakable in the bookcase's outline. "It leads to the garden, I presume?" The colonel's eyes widened, and he swore under his breath. "Good Lord, I'd forgotten that old thing. Built centuries ago for servants or some such. I told Finch about it when he was cataloging the blueprints, but I never thought—" He trailed off, his face darkening. "You think the thief used it?" "It's possible," Miss Marple said, her needles still in her bag, but her mind as sharp as their points. "The passage is narrow, but the globe could fit if handled with care. The question is who knew of it, and who had the chance to use it." The colonel rubbed his chin, his eyes narrowing. "Finch, blast him. He's the only one I told. Though I suppose Crane might have sniffed it out. He's been through my records before, appraising things. But Lady Beatrice? Or that scholar, Morrow? They're guests, not architects." Miss Marple's smile was gentle but unyielding. "People learn things, Colonel, in the most unexpected ways, like Mrs. Carter's cook, who knew every shortcut in the village because she listened at the market. I shall need to ask a few more questions, but the study has been most enlightening." As the colonel muttered about locks and thieves, Miss Marple's gaze returned to the candle. Its wax was a thread that tied Dr. Morrow and Victor Crane to this room, but the passage was a broader clue, one that could implicate anyone with knowledge of the manor's secrets. She thought of the village carpenter, Mr. Hodges, who had once built a hidden drawer for a client and boasted of it in the pub, only to find it robbed within a week. Secrets, she knew, were rarely as safe as their keepers believed. She stepped toward the door, pausing to glance at the map on the wall. Its curled corner revealed a faint pencil mark, a tiny arrow pointing to the bookcase. "Curious," she murmured, adding it to her mental catalogue. The study was a treasure trove of clues, each one a whisper of the thief's movements, and Miss Marple was determined to listen. As she left the room, the Colonel trailing behind her, she felt the weight of her pocketed clues, the bead, the thread, the cufflink, the button, the paper, the splinter, the hair, and knew that the vanished antique globe was closer to being found, if only she could unravel the next thread in the Manor's tangled web. Chapter 7. Whispers in the Village. The sun was dipping low over St. Mary Mead, painting the sky in hues of apricot and lavender, as Miss Jane Marple stepped out of Colonel Rutherford's manor and onto the winding lane that led to the village. Her knitting bag swung gently at her side, a familiar companion as she made her way past the hedgerows, their leaves whispering in the evening breeze. The manor's secrets, the hidden passage, the wax-smudged candle, the growing collection of clues in her pocket, had sharpened her resolve, but she knew that the village itself, with its gossip and sharp-eyed inhabitants, held answers the manor's walls could not provide. People, she had learned long ago, were like her knitting. A single dropped stitch could unravel the whole pattern, and St. Mary Mead was never short of loose threads. Her first stop was the post office, a squat building with a red-tiled roof and a window adorned with geraniums. Inside, Mr. Polk, the postman, was sorting letters, his thick fingers deft despite his years. He looked up as Miss Marple entered, his weathered face breaking into a grin. "Miss Marple, not often we see you here this late. Trouble at the manor, I hear." "Oh, you've heard, have you?" she said, her tone as light as a parish tea. She settled onto a stool by the counter, her needles emerging with their customary click. "News travels fast in St. Mary Mead. What's the village saying about the Colonel's globe?" Mr. Polk chuckled, pushing a pile of envelopes aside. "Plenty, as you'd expect. A rare thing like that, gone in the night. Folk reckon it's someone from outside. London types, maybe, with sticky fingers." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Though I saw a dark car parked near the manor's back gate last night, round 11. Couldn't make out the driver, mind. Too dark, and I was on my rounds." Miss Marple's needles paused, just for a moment. "A car, you say, near the garden gate?" Her mind flickered to the hidden passage, its exit concealed by ivy. "Any markings on it? A number plate, perhaps?" Mr. Polk scratched his chin. "Too far to see proper. Black, maybe navy, with a long nose, like one of them fancy motors dealers drive. Didn't stop long, just idled a bit, then off it went." He shrugged, returning to his letters. "Could be nothing, but it struck me odd, what with the theft and all." "Most interesting," Miss Marple murmured, her needles resuming their rhythm. "You're a keen observer, Mr. Polk. Anything else catch your eye last night?" He hesitated, then leaned in again. "Well, since you ask, that scholar, Dr. Morrow, was out walking late. Saw her near the church, head down, carrying that notebook of hers. Looked like she was in a hurry. Not saying she's up to no good, mind, but it's queer, her being out so late." Miss Marple nodded, her mind filing away the detail. "Queer indeed. Thank you, Mr. Polk. You've a way of seeing what others miss, like Mrs. Price's postboy, who spotted that runaway cart before it crashed." She rose, tucking her knitting away, and stepped back into the evening air, her thoughts turning over the postman's words. A dark car, a hurried scholar, small threads, but each one tugged at the mystery. Her next stop was the grocer's, a cheerful shop with a bell that jangled as she entered. Mrs. Higgs, the grocer's wife, was behind the counter, her apron dusted with flour, her eyes bright with the village's latest talk. "Miss Marple," she exclaimed, wiping her hands. "Come about the Colonel's globe, I wager? Terrible business, that. Who'd steal such a thing?" "Someone with a purpose, I expect," Miss Marple said, her smile gentle but probing. She settled near a stack of tinned biscuits, her needles clicking softly. "What's the talk in the shop, Mrs. Higgs? You hear all sorts here." Mrs. Higgs leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Oh, plenty. Most reckon it's that dealer, Mr. Crane. He was in here last week buying tea and boasting about a big sale he's got coming up in London. Said he'd be set for life if it went through. Didn't say what, but folk are putting two and two together." She sniffed, clearly unimpressed. "Flashy sort, that one. Always in a suit, like he's selling the crown jewels." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "A big sale, you say? How intriguing. Did he mention anything else? About the Colonel, perhaps, or his collection?" "Not directly," Mrs. Higgs admitted. "But he asked about the Manor's comings and goings, who's staying, who's not. Said it was for his business, knowing who might buy antiques. I thought it nosy, but he's got that charm, you know. Makes you talk." She paused, then added, "Mind, Lady Beatrice was in yesterday, buying chocolates. Asked if we'd seen any strangers about. Seemed jumpy, for all her airs." "Jumpy?" Miss Marple's needles slowed, her mind alert. "That's unlike Lady Beatrice. Did she say why?" Mrs. Higgs shook her head. "Not a word, but she kept looking out the window, like she expected someone. Paid quick and left. Odd for her. She usually chats up a storm." Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts drifting to the green silk thread and the missing pearl bead. "Odd indeed. And Mr. Finch, or Dr. Morrow, any talk of them?" "Finch keeps to himself," Mrs. Higgs said. "But the butcher's boy saw him in the lane 2 nights ago, carrying a parcel under his arm. Didn't stop to chat, which ain't like him. As for Dr. Morrow, she's a queer one. Always scribbling, never smiles. Folk reckon she's after the Colonel's books, not just that globe." "Thank you, Mrs. Higgs," Miss Marple said, rising. "You're a treasure, like Mrs. Bantry's cook, who always knows who's been in the larder." She stepped outside, the jangle of the bell fading behind her. The village was quiet now, its cottages glowing with lamplight, but the whispers she'd gathered were loud in her mind. A dark car, a hurried scholar, a boastful dealer, a jumpy guest, each a stitch in the pattern, but none yet the key to the vanished globe. Her final stop was the vicarage, where the maid, Jenny, was sweeping the steps. Jenny, a shy girl with a knack for noticing details, blushed as Miss Marple approached. "Evening, miss," she said, clutching her broom. "Heard about the Colonel's trouble. Awful, ain't it?" "Awful indeed," Miss Marple said, her tone as warm as a fireside chat. "You're about the Manor often, Jenny. Did you see anything last night? Anyone near the garden, perhaps?" Jenny hesitated, her eyes darting to the lane. "Well, I shouldn't say, but I was bringing laundry to the Manor yesterday, round 7. Lady Beatrice was in the hall asking about the study's lock. Wanted to know if it was new or old. I thought it strange, her being a guest and all." She lowered her voice. "And later, when I left, I saw Mr. Finch by the garden door, looking like he'd seen a ghost. Didn't say nothing, just hurried inside." Miss Marple's needles, though tucked away, seemed to click in her mind. "The garden door, you say? How curious. And Mr. Crane or Dr. Morrow?" "Didn't see Mr. Crane," Jenny said, But Dr. Morrow was in the garden earlier, sketching them roses, kept looking at the manor like she was measuring it. I didn't think much of it then. But now, she trailed off, her cheeks pink. "You've done well to remember, Jenny," Miss Marple said, her smile encouraging. "It's the little things that matter, like Mrs. Carter's maid spotting that broken gate before the sheep got out." She patted Jenny's arm and turned back toward the manor, the evening air cool against her face. As she walked, her mind wove the village's whispers into the tapestry of clues. The dark car near the garden gate, Crane's boast of a big sale, Lady Beatrice's questions about the lock, Finch's nervous vigil, Dr. Morrow's late-night walk. Each pointed to the manor, to the hidden passage, to the candle's wax. She thought of the village fate when a stolen pie had been traced to a boy who'd left crumbs on his scarf. Small signs, but enough to unravel the truth. Her pocket, heavy with the pearl bead, silk thread, cufflink, brass button, paper scrap, splinter, and hair, felt like a map of its own, guiding her toward the thief. The manor loomed ahead, its windows aglow against the twilight. Miss Marple paused at the gate, her eyes lingering on the garden path, where the scuff and smear of dirt still marked the gravel. The village had spoken, and its words had tightened the net around the suspects. The vanished antique globe was no longer just a missing treasure. It was a mirror reflecting the desires and fears of those within the manor's walls. As she stepped toward the door, her mind as sharp as her needles, Miss Marple knew the next thread was waiting to be pulled. Chapter 8. A Dinner of Motives. The dining room of Colonel Rutherford's manor gleamed under the soft glow of a chandelier, its crystal prisms scattering light across the polished mahogany table. The air was rich with the aroma of roasted pheasant and red wine, a testament to the Colonel's insistence on maintaining standards despite the shadow of the stolen globe. Miss Jane Marple sat at one end, her knitting bag tucked discreetly by her chair, her eyes as bright and observant as a sparrow's. The Colonel had insisted on hosting a dinner for his guests, perhaps to restore a sense of normalcy, or perhaps, Miss Marple suspected, to keep them all under his watchful eye. The suspects, Harold Finch, Lady Beatrice Langley, Victor Crane, and Dr. Evelyn Morrow, were seated around the table, their faces a study in strained civility. Harold Finch, his tweed jacket rumpled, sat to Miss Marple's left, his fingers fidgeting with a napkin, his eyes darting to the Colonel as if expecting a reprimand. Lady Beatrice, resplendent in a sapphire gown, occupied the seat opposite, her smile as polished as the silverware, but her gaze sharp, flicking between her fellow guests with the precision of a fencer. Victor Crane, at the Colonel's right, exuded his usual charm, his suit impeccable, his mustache a perfect line, though his laughter rang a touch too loud. Dr. Morrow at the far end was a study in restraint, her plain dress and tightly pinned hair underscoring her academic demeanor, her fork moving with mechanical precision as she ate. The Colonel, presiding at the head of the table, was subdued, his mustache drooping as he carved the pheasant with more force than necessary. "A grim day," he said, his voice gruff, "but we'll not let this theft ruin our evening. Miss Marple is on the case, and I've no doubt she'll ferret out the culprit." His eyes swept the table, lingering on each guest as if searching for a telltale flinch. Miss Marple smiled, her needles resting in her lap, though her mind was as active as ever. "I'm merely asking questions, Colonel," she said, her tone as gentle as a village sermon. People are so interesting, don't you find? They reveal so much, often without meaning to. Her gaze settled briefly on Harold, whose napkin was now a crumpled mess in his hands. Lady Beatrice laughed, a silvery sound that cut through the tension. "Oh, Miss Marple, you're too modest. I wager you've already got us all figured out." She sipped her wine, her eyes glinting over the rim of the glass. "Though I must say, it's rather thrilling to be part of a mystery, like something out of a Christie novel." Victor Crane chuckled, leaning back in his chair. "A mystery, yes, but a costly one. That globe was a treasure, worth more than this manor, I'd wager." He glanced at the colonel, his smile apologetic. "No offense, of course, but a piece like that? A thief would need a buyer lined up to make it worth the risk." Dr. Morrow's fork paused, and she looked up, her eyes sharp behind her glasses. "A buyer, perhaps, but not necessarily for profit. Some might steal it for its historical value, to study it, to possess its secrets." Her voice was cool, but there was a challenge in her gaze as it met Crane's. Harold Finch flinched, his napkin slipping to the floor. "It's not about secrets," he muttered, his voice barely audible. "It's just gone. Someone took it, and we're all sitting here pretending we don't know who." His eyes darted to the colonel, then away, his face pale. The colonel's knife clattered against his plate. "Enough of that, Finch," he snapped. "If you've something to say, out with it. No use muttering like a schoolboy caught with his hand in the jam jar." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, though her expression remained serene. "Mr. Finch is right, in a way," she said. "The globe is gone, but it's left behind a trail of questions. For instance, the study's hidden passage." She paused, her words dropping into the silence like pebbles into a pond. "A clever way to slip in and out, don't you think?" The effect was immediate. Harold's fork froze halfway to his mouth, a bead of sweat forming on his brow. Lady Beatrice's smile tightened, her fingers gripping her wineglass. Crane's laugh faltered, and he reached for his water, his cufflink glinting. The twin, Miss Marple noted, to the one in her pocket. Dr. Morrow's expression remained impassive, but her hand tightened on her fork, her knuckles whitening. "A hidden passage?" Lady Beatrice said, her voice light but strained. "How perfectly Gothic. You don't suppose someone crept through it like a villain in a melodrama?" She laughed, but it was thin, like glass about to crack. Crane recovered quickly, his smile returning. "Fascinating, Miss Marple. Old houses are full of such tricks, but who'd know about it? The colonel, of course, and perhaps Finch, with all his poking about in blueprints." He glanced at Harold, his tone teasing but pointed. Harold flushed, his voice rising. I knew of it, but I never used it. Why would I? I'm no thief." His hands shook, and he knocked over his wineglass, the red liquid spreading like blood across the tablecloth. The colonel swore under his breath, signaling a maid to clean the spill. "Steady, man," he growled. "No one's accused you. Yet." Dr. Morrow set down her fork, her eyes narrowing. "A passage explains the how, but not the why. The globe's size makes it cumbersome to move. Whoever took it needed a plan, and a place to hide it." Her gaze flicked to Crane, then away, as if she'd said too much. Miss Marple's needles, though still in her bag, seemed to click in her mind. "A plan, indeed," she said, "and knowledge of the manor's ways. The passage is a secret, but secrets have a way of slipping out, like Mrs. Higgs's recipe for scones, which the whole village knew by spring." Her eyes moved from face to face, noting each reaction. Harold's panic, Lady Beatrice's forced gaiety, Crane's calculated ease, Dr. Morrow's guarded calm. As the maid cleared the spilled wine, Lady Beatrice leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "If I were a betting woman, I'd wager on someone with a buyer waiting, someone who knows the market for such things." Her eyes slid to Crane, her smile sharp as a blade. Crane raised an eyebrow, unfazed. "A bold guess, Lady Beatrice, but I was in London last night, as I told Miss Marple, hardly skulking through passages with a globe under my arm." He turned to the colonel, his tone earnest. "You know me, sir. I deal in open markets, not back alleys." The colonel grunted, his eyes narrowing. "I know you're a sharp one, Crane, always sniffing out a profit, but I trust Miss Marple to sort this out." He glanced at her, a flicker of hope in his weary face. Miss Marple smiled, her expression as benign as a Sunday hymn. "Trust is a fine thing, Colonel, but facts are better. The passage, the candle, the footprints in the garden, they all tell a story. Like Mrs. Bantry's lost earrings, found in the end because someone couldn't resist wearing them." Her gaze lingered on Lady Beatrice's bracelet, where the missing pearl was still conspicuous. The dinner continued, but the air was thick with suspicion, each guest guarding their words as carefully as the colonel guarded his study. As dessert was served, a delicate lemon tart, Miss Marple observed the interplay. Harold's nervous glances at the colonel, Lady Beatrice's barbed remarks to Dr. Morrow about dusty academics, Crane's overly genial anecdotes about London auctions, Dr. Morrow's distracted silence as she traced the edge of her plate. The table was a microcosm of motives, each guest a thread in the tapestry of the theft. As the meal drew to a close, Miss Marple rose, her knitting bag in hand. "A delightful evening, Colonel," she said. "You've all given me much to think about." Her eyes swept the table, catching the flicker of unease in Harold's face, the calculation in Crane's, the defiance in Lady Beatrice's, the reserve in Dr. Morrow's. "I'll bid you good night. The truth, you see, is like my knitting. It takes shape one stitch at a time." She stepped into the hall, the chandelier's light fading behind her. The dinner had been a stage, each suspect playing their part, but the hidden passage had shifted the script, exposing vulnerabilities. Her pocket, heavy with the pearl bead, silk thread, cufflink, brass button, paper scrap, splinter, and hair, was a treasure trove of its own, each clue a whisper of the thief's identity. She thought of the village choir, where one off-key voice could disrupt the harmony, and knew that one false move would reveal the culprit. As she made her way to her room, the manor's silence seemed to hum with secrets, and Miss Marple, with her quiet persistence, was ready to unravel the next thread in the mystery of the vanished antique globe. Chapter 9. The Candle's Clue. The manor was cloaked in the hush of early evening, its corridors dim as the last rays of sunlight slipped below the horizon. Miss Jane Marple returned to Colonel Rutherford's study, her knitting bag a quiet companion at her side, her mind alive with the threads of suspicion woven through the dinner. The room, with its heavy bookcases and faded maps, felt like a chessboard where the final moves were yet to be played. The empty pedestal, its velvet cushion still bearing the ghost of the Delisle globe, stood as a silent challenge. The dinner had revealed tensions. Harold's panic, Lady Beatrice's barbs, Victor Crane's polished deflection, Dr. Morrow's guarded silence. But it was the study, Miss Marple knew, that held the key to the thief's movements. She closed the door behind her, the oak settling with a soft thud, and moved to the desk where the candle stood, its pale yellow wax a stark contrast to the polished mahogany. The wick was blackened, the wax pooled in uneven drips, a sign of recent use. The colonel had been adamant. He rarely lit candles, preferring the electric lamp that hung overhead, its light steady and modern. Miss Marple leaned closer, her gloved fingers tracing the wax's edge, noting a faint smudge on the desk's surface, identical to those on Dr. Morrow's cuff and Victor Crane's portfolio. "Someone was here after dark," she murmured, her voice as soft as a whisper in church, "and not for reading." She lifted the candle, examining its base. A tiny fleck of green paint clung to the wax, barely visible but unmistakable, a hue that matched nothing in the study's decor. She slipped it into her pocket, joining the pearl bead, silk thread, cufflink, brass button, paper scrap, splinter, and hair. The paint was a new thread, suggesting the globe had been moved to a place where such a color existed, perhaps a crate or a vehicle. She thought of Mrs. Price's shed, where a stolen silver tray had been hidden, its polish marred by a smear of green paint from a garden tool. Small details, she knew, could unravel great mysteries. Her gaze shifted to the hidden panel in the bookcase, now closed but betraying its presence with the faint scratch on the floor. She pushed it open, the hinges creaking softly, and peered into the narrow passage. The stone walls were cool, the air damp, and the faint scuff of footprints remained, too blurred to identify but proof of passage. She stepped inside, her eyes adjusting to the dimness, and followed the path to the garden door. It was ajar, the ivy. Outside, stirring in the evening breeze. On the threshold, caught in a crack, was a shred of fabric, tweed, gray, like Harold Finch's jacket. She added it to her collection, her mind turning to the nervous assistant, his knowledge of the passage, his ink-stained fingers. Returning to the study, Miss Marple examined the bookcase itself. The curled map she'd noticed earlier, pinned to the wall, bore its faint pencil mark, an arrow pointing to the panel. She unpinned it, revealing a second mark, fainter still, a tiny sketch of a meridian ring, unmistakably the globe's. The handwriting was precise, like Dr. Morrow's, but the ink was different, black, not blue. "Curious," she murmured, tucking the map into her pocket. The sketch suggested someone had studied the globe closely, perhaps planning its removal, but the ink hinted at another hand. She thought of the village schoolmaster, Mr. Pettigrew, who had once left notes in a book to mark his theft, only to be betrayed by his own pen. The desk yielded another clue, a faint indentation in the blotter, as if something heavy had been set there briefly. She pressed her fingers to it, tracing the shape. A rectangle, perhaps a small box or case. The globe, she reasoned, could have been placed in such a container to protect it during transport. The splinter in her pocket, with its different grain, supported the idea of a crate. But who had the means to arrange such a thing? Victor Crane, with his London contacts, Dr. Morrow, with her meticulous sketches, or Harold, with his access to the manor's every corner. Miss Marple moved to the window, her eyes scanning the garden beyond. The gravel path, disturbed by scuffs and a smear of dirt, held no new secrets, but the rose bushes caught her attention. A single petal, crushed and out of place, lay near the path's edge. She stepped outside, crouching to retrieve it, and noticed a faint imprint in the soil. A boot, larger than the scuff she'd seen before, its tread deep and modern. It matched neither Harold's narrow boots nor Dr. Morrow's sensible shoes, but it could belong to Crane, whose polished appearance extended to his footwear. She marked the spot in her mind, her thoughts circling back to the dark car Mr. Polk had seen, its driver obscured. As she returned to the study, the colonel appeared, his face etched with worry. "Any progress, Miss Marple?" he asked, his voice gruff but hopeful. "This business is wearing me thin." "A little, Colonel," she said, her smile as gentle as a summer's day. "The candle, you see, is quite telling. It was lit recently, despite your preference for electric light. And the passage, someone used it, I'm certain." She paused, her eyes meeting his. "Tell me, did anyone ask about the study's layout? The bookcase, perhaps, or the garden door?" The colonel frowned, rubbing his chin. "Can't say they did, not directly. Finch knows the blueprints, of course. He's been through every inch of this place. Crane's asked about the study's security before, for insurance purposes. Said a locked room needs a strong bolt. Lady Beatrice once remarked on the bookcase, said it looked out of place, but that was months ago. Morrow? She's only ever talked about the globe itself." He shook his head. "Blast it, Miss Marple, they all had a chance to snoop." "Indeed," she said, her tone soothing. "But chances are only part of it. Motive, opportunity, knowledge, they all intertwine, like Mrs. Bantry's rose trellis, which fell because one stake was weak." She glanced at the candle again, its wax a silent witness. "The candle, Colonel. When did you last light it?" He blinked, surprised. "Months ago, if that. No need for it with the lamp working fine. Whoever lit it wasn't me." Miss Marple nodded, her mind weaving the clues into a tighter pattern. The candle tied Dr. Morrow and Crane to the study, but the tweed scrap pointed to Harold, and the boot print suggested an outsider, or someone posing as one. The green paint fleck, the meridian sketch, the rectangular indentation, all hinted at a careful plan, executed with precision. She thought of the village baker, Mr. Hodges, who had once hidden stolen coins in a flour tin, betrayed by a smudge of dough on his sleeve. Small traces, she knew, could lead to great truths. As she left the study, the colonel trailing behind, she paused by the garden door, her eyes catching a glint in the gravel. A tiny glass bead, iridescent, unlike Lady Beatrice's pearl. She slipped it into her pocket, its weight joining the growing collection. The pearl bead, silk thread, cufflink, brass button, paper scrap, splinter, hair, tweed scrap, map, and now the glass bead. The study had spoken, its secrets laid bare in wax and scratches, and Miss Marple felt the net tightening. The vanished antique globe was no longer just a missing treasure. It was a map to the thief's heart, and she was drawing closer to its center with every clue. Chapter 10. The Dealer's Deception. The Manor's library was a sanctuary of quiet, its high shelves casting long shadows in the lamplight as evening deepened over St. Mary Mead. Miss Jane Marple sat at the long oak table, her knitting bag beside her, though her needles remained tucked away, her mind too occupied with the threads of the mystery to indulge in their familiar rhythm. The study's secrets, the hidden passage, the candle's wax, the green paint fleck, had tightened the web around the suspects, but it was Victor Crane, the antique dealer, whose polished exterior and convenient alibi nagged at her thoughts. His train ticket to London, his boast of a big sale, the wax on his portfolio. They were pieces of a puzzle that demanded closer scrutiny. She had resolved to test his story, and a telephone call to London, she knew, might unravel the truth. Miss Marple rose, her black lace-up shoes silent on the rug, and made her way to the Manor's telephone, a sleek black instrument in the hall. She dialed a number from memory, her fingers steady despite the late hour. The line crackled, then cleared, and a familiar voice answered, Mr. Reginald Holt, a discreet auctioneer she'd met years ago during a case involving a stolen cameo. Miss Marple, he said, his tone warm but tinged with surprise. An unexpected pleasure. What brings you to call at this hour? A small matter, Mr. Holt, she said, her voice as gentle as a parish tea. I'm at Colonel Rutherford's manor looking into a theft. You know Mr. Victor Crane, I believe? He mentioned dining with you in London last night. There was a pause, the crackle of the line filling the silence. Crane? Yes, I know him, Holt said, his tone cautious. We did meet last night at the Savoy. He was pitching a sale, a rare globe, 18th century Delisle's work. Described it to a T, right down to the brass meridian. Wanted to gauge interest, though he didn't say he had it in hand. I told him I'd need to see it first. We parted around 10, I'd say. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed, though her voice remained mild. 10, you say? And he was in good spirits? No mention of where he'd be after? Cheerful as ever, Holt said. Said he was staying at his club. Didn't mention returning to St. Mary Mead, if that's what you're getting at. Why? Is he mixed up in something? Oh, just a thread I'm following, she said, her tone light. You've been most helpful, Mr. Holt, like Mrs. Bantry's jeweler, who always knows which stones are real. She thanked him and hung up, her mind racing. Crane's dinner in London was confirmed, but the early hour of his departure, 10 o'clock, left ample time for a late train or a car back to the manor. And his talk of a Delisle globe, so precisely described, was no coincidence. She returned to the library, settling at the table to review her clues. The pearl bead, the silk thread, the cufflink, the brass button, the paper scrap, the splinter, the hair, the tweed scrap, the map with its meridian sketch, the glass bead, and the green paint fleck. The cufflink, gold and gleaming, matched Crane's, and the wax on his portfolio tied him to the study. The dark car seen by Mr. Polk idling near the garden gate could easily be Crane's, a dealer's vehicle, sleek and modern, but the how of the theft was still elusive. The hidden passage offered a route, but moving the globe, fragile and cumbersome, required planning. The green paint suggested a crate, and Crane, with his network of buyers, had the means to arrange one. Miss Marple decided to confront him. She sent a maid to summon Crane to the library, and within minutes he appeared, his suit as impeccable as ever, though his smile was a touch strained. Miss Marple, he said, settling into a chair, his portfolio tucked under his arm. You're tireless, aren't you? Any progress on the Colonel's globe? A little, she said, her eyes gentle but unyielding. I've been speaking with friends in London. Mr. Holt, for instance. He confirmed your dinner at the Savoy, though you parted earlier than you implied. Around 10, not 11. She paused, watching his face. Plenty of time to catch a late train back to St. Mary Mead, or perhaps drive. A dark car was seen near the manor last night, you know. Crane's smile faltered, his fingers tightening on the portfolio. A car? You're reaching, Miss Marple. I was at my club, as I said. Holt must be mistaken about the time. He leaned back, his tone smooth, but his eyes wary. I'm a dealer, not a cat burglar. Why would I risk my reputation for a globe? Miss Marple's gaze rested on his cufflink, identical to the one in her pocket. Reputation is a fragile thing, Mr. Crane. Like Mrs. Carter's silver, which vanished because someone thought they could sell it quietly. You spoke to Mr. Holt about a Delisle globe, described in remarkable detail, almost as if you'd seen it recently, perhaps even held it. Crane laughed, a sharp sound that echoed in the quiet library. Holt's got a loose tongue. I was speaking hypothetically, testing the market. Dealers do it all the time. I saw the globe last week during my appraisal, that's all. He opened his portfolio, pulling out a sheet of paper. Here's my valuation, if you doubt me, all above board. Miss Marple glanced at the paper, her eyes noting the neat figures, the professional tone. But her mind was on the wax smudge she'd seen on his portfolio, the green paint fleck in her pocket. "You've a keen eye for detail, Mr. Crane," she said. "Like the study's candle, for instance. You noticed it was half burned, though you didn't light it. And yet, there's wax on your portfolio, the same shade as the study's candle." His face paled, just for a moment before his smile returned. "Wax? Must have brushed against something. I handle old things, Miss Marple. Candles, seals, all sorts. Doesn't mean I was creeping about the study." He stood, his movements brisk. "I've answered your questions. If you've no proof, I'll bid you good night." Miss Marple rose, her expression as serene as a summer's day. "Proof is a patient thing, Mr. Crane. It builds, like my knitting, one stitch at a time. Thank you for your time." As he left, his footsteps sharp on the floor, she noted the faint creak of his shoes, a modern tread, like the boot print in the garden. She thought of Mr. Hodges, the village jeweler, whose boasts of a sale had led to his downfall when a stolen ring was traced to his shop. Crane's deception was unraveling, but the globe's hiding place remained a mystery. She stepped to the window, gazing at the garden, where the rose bushes stood sentinel in the moonlight. The gravel path, with its scuffs and smears, whispered of hurried steps. Her pocket, heavy with clues, the pearl bead, silk thread, cufflink, brass button, paper scrap, splinter, hair, tweed scrap, map, glass bead, and green paint fleck, was a map of its own, pointing to Crane's guilt but not yet to the globe. The car, the crate, the passage, they formed a plan. But where had the globe been taken? She thought of the village postman who had once found a stolen bicycle in a barn because he'd noticed a tire track in the mud. Small signs, she knew, led to great truths. As she turned from the window, her eyes caught a glint on the library floor. A tiny brass screw, its head worn but distinct, unlike anything in the room's fittings. She bent to retrieve it, slipping it into her pocket. It was the kind of screw used in crates, perhaps one used to secure the globe. Crane's London connections, his talk of a sale, the car seen by Mr. Polk, all pointed to a plan to spirit the globe away. But the manor held one more secret, she was certain, and she would find it. With a quiet resolve, Miss Marple left the library, her mind as sharp as her needles, ready to pull the next thread in the mystery of the vanished antique globe. Chapter 11. The Trap is Set. The moon hung low over St. Mary Mead, its silver light casting a ghostly glow across the manor's gardens, where the rose bushes stood like silent sentinels. Inside, the manor was still, its corridors hushed, though the air seemed to hum with the tension of secrets yet to be unveiled. Miss Jane Marple sat in the library, her knitting bag at her side, though her needles remained untouched, her mind too focused on the web of clues she had woven. The candle's wax, the hidden passage, the green paint fleck, the brass screw. Each pointed to Victor Crane, whose polished alibi was fraying under scrutiny. Yet the globe remained elusive, its hiding place a final piece of the puzzle. To catch the thief, Miss Marple knew she would need to bait a trap, and the Manor's study, with its empty pedestal, was the perfect stage. She sought out Colonel Rutherford in his private sitting room, where he was nursing a brandy, his face etched with the strain of the past days. The fire crackled in the grate, casting flickering shadows across his weathered features. "Miss Marple," he said, setting down his glass, "I hope you've news. This blasted theft is wearing me to the bone." "A plan, Colonel," she said, her voice as gentle as a vicar's prayer. "The thief is clever, but greed is a restless master. I propose we announce that you've discovered a rare map, rarer even than the globe, worth a fortune, hidden in the study. Say it will be displayed tomorrow evening, under lock and key. The thief, I suspect, will be tempted to act again." The colonel's eyes narrowed, a spark of his old military fire returning. "A trap, eh? Like luring a fox with a hen. But what if they don't bite? Or worse, what if they do and slip away again?" Miss Marple's smile was serene, though her eyes gleamed with purpose. "They won't slip away, Colonel, not if we're watching. The study's passage is their path, and we'll be ready. I'll arrange for the police to be near, discreetly, of course, like Mrs. Bantry's garden party, when we caught that pickpocket because we knew where he'd strike." The colonel nodded, his mustache twitching with approval. "Right then. I'll make the announcement at breakfast. All of 'em. Finch, Lady Beatrice, Crane, Morrow, will hear it. If one's the thief, they'll not resist a prize like that." He paused, his brow furrowing. "You're sure it's one of them?" "As sure as I am of my knitting," Miss Marple said. "The clues, the wax, the cufflink, the passage, point to someone within these walls. We need only give them a chance to betray themselves." The next morning, the dining room was a theater of suppressed tension, as the colonel, his voice booming with purpose, made his announcement. "I've found something in the study," he said, his eyes sweeping over the assembled guests. Harold Finch, pale and fidgeting, Lady Beatrice, her smile tight, Victor Crane, his charm unshaken, Dr. Morrow, her expression unreadable. "A rare map, 16th century, worth more than the globe. I'll display it tonight under lock and key. No one's to touch it, mind." He glanced at Miss Marple, who nodded imperceptibly, her needles clicking softly in her lap. The effect was subtle, but unmistakable. Harold's fork clattered against his plate, his eyes darting to the door. Lady Beatrice's laughter was a shade too bright, her fingers twisting a napkin. Crane's smile widened, but his hand paused on his coffee cup, a flicker of calculation in his gaze. Dr. Morrow's lips parted, as if to speak, but she closed them, her fingers tightening on her teacup. Miss Marple watched, her mind as sharp as her needles, noting each reaction like stitches in a pattern. The day passed in a quiet hum of anticipation. Miss Marple spent it in the village, confirming details with the local police sergeant, a steady man named Gibbs who knew her methods well. "We'll have men in the garden, Miss Marple," he assured her, "hidden by the yews. Anyone comes out that passage, we'll nab 'em." She thanked him, her thoughts drifting to the village baker, Mr. Hodges, whose stolen loaf had been recovered because a trap was set in the market square. As night fell, the manor grew still, its lights dimmed to a soft glow. Miss Marple and the colonel took their positions in the study, concealed behind a heavy curtain near the bookcase. The pedestal stood empty, but a locked box, ostensibly containing the map, sat on the desk, its presence a silent lure. The electric lamp was off, the candle lit to mimic a late-night vigil, its flame casting flickering shadows across the room. Miss Marple's eyes, accustomed to the dark, watched the hidden panel, her breathing steady, her mind alert. Minutes ticked by, the silence broken only by the distant creak of the manor's settling beams. Then a faint scrape echoed from the passage, followed by the soft thud of footsteps. The panel slid open, and a figure emerged, moving with cautious grace. The candlelight caught the gleam of a gold cufflink. Victor Crane, his suit slightly rumpled, a canvas bag in his hand. He crossed to the desk, his movements swift but careful, and tested the box's lock. Finding it secure, he muttered under his breath, his fingers searching the desk for a tool. Miss Marple nodded to the colonel, who stepped forward, his voice a low growl. "Crane, step away from that desk." The dealer froze, his eyes wide, but before he could bolt, Sergeant Gibbs and 2 constables emerged from the passage, their torches pinning him in their glare. "Mr. Crane," Miss Marple said, stepping into the light, her voice as calm as a summer's day. "You've been most obliging. The globe, I presume, is in that bag." Crane's face twisted, his charm crumbling. He opened the bag, revealing the Delisle globe, its parchment gleaming in the candlelight, carefully wrapped in cloth. "You've no proof I took it before," he said, his voice tight. "I was just checking the study." Miss Marple's smile was gentle but unyielding. "The wax on your portfolio, the cufflink in the garden, the green paint from a crate, your talk of a sale in London, they tell a different story, like Mr. Pettigrew's stolen books, traced by the ink on his hands." She turned to Gibbs. "Sergeant, you'll find a crate in Mr. Crane's car, I expect, parked near the garden gate." Gibbs nodded, one constable already heading out to check. Crane's shoulders slumped, his defiance fading. "It was too good a chance," he muttered. "The globe's worth a fortune, and the colonel wouldn't sell." The colonel's face reddened, but Miss Marple raised a hand. "Greed, Mr. Crane, is a poor master. You used the passage known from your appraisals and lit the candle to work by night, but you left too many traces." She glanced at the globe, its brass meridian glinting. "The manor has a way of keeping its secrets, but not from those who listen." As the constables led Crane away, the globe was returned to its pedestal, its presence restoring a measure of peace to the study. Miss Marple's pocket, heavy with clues, the pearl bead, silk thread, cufflink, brass button, paper scrap, splinter, hair, tweed scrap, map, glass bead, green paint fleck, and brass screw, had guided her to the truth. The trap had sprung, and the thief was caught. But one final task remained: to unravel the loose threads of the other suspects' motives. With a quiet nod to the colonel, she stepped into the night, her mind already turning to the final reckoning. Chapter 12. The Unveiling. The drawing room of Colonel Rutherford's manor glowed with the soft warmth of lamplight, its heavy curtains drawn against the chill of the late August evening. The fire crackled in the grate, casting a flickering dance across the polished furniture and the faces of the assembled company. Colonel Rutherford stood by the mantel, his mustache bristling with a mix of relief and indignation, the Delisle globe now restored to its pedestal in the study, but its theft still a raw wound. Miss Jane Marple sat in a high-backed chair, her knitting bag at her side, her needles clicking softly as she surveyed the room. Harold Finch, Lady Beatrice Langley, and Dr. Evelyn Morrow were seated, their expressions a blend of curiosity and unease, while Victor Crane, his hands bound by the constable's cuffs, stood near the door under Sergeant Gibbs's watchful eye. The colonel cleared his throat, his voice gruff but steady. "Miss Marple has something to say," he announced, his eyes sweeping the room. "The globe's back, thanks to her, but I want to know how it happened and why. Go on, Miss Marple. Lay it out." Miss Marple's needles paused, and she looked up, her eyes as bright and gentle as a village sunrise. "Thank you, Colonel," she said, her voice soft but carrying the weight of certainty. "The theft of your globe was a puzzle, but puzzles, like my knitting, have a pattern, and once you find the first stitch, the rest unravels. Let me tell you how it came about." She leaned forward, her gaze moving from face to face. The study, with its locked door and hidden passage, was the key. The passage, known to the Colonel and Mr. Finch from the Manor's blueprints, was a secret that proved less secret than supposed. The globe, large, fragile, valuable, required a careful thief, one with knowledge of its worth and the Manor's ways. And the clues, small but telling, pointed to one among us. Harold Finch shifted, his face pale, his fingers twisting a handkerchief. Lady Beatrice's smile was fixed, her sapphire gown catching the light as she toyed with her bracelet. Dr. Morrow sat rigid, her notebook closed on her lap, her eyes guarded. Crane, despite his predicament, maintained a defiant tilt to his chin, though his eyes flickered with unease. Miss Marple continued, her tone as calm as a Sunday sermon. "Mr. Crane, you see, had the strongest motive, profit. As a dealer, he knew the globe's value, having appraised it for £10,000 last year. His inquiries in London, confirmed by Mr. Holt, showed he was already seeking a buyer for a Delisle globe, described with uncanny precision. His train ticket to London, while true, covered an early departure, 10 o'clock, leaving time to return by car, as Mr. Polk saw near the garden gate. Crane opened his mouth to protest, but Miss Marple raised a hand, her gesture gentle but firm. "The wax on your portfolio, Mr. Crane, matched the candle in the study, lit to avoid the electric lamp's glow. The cufflink in the garden, identical to yours, marked your path through the passage. The green paint fleck found with the candle suggested a crate, confirmed when the police found one in your car, along with the brass screw I discovered in the library. You used the passage, known from your appraisals, to steal the globe, planning to sell it discreetly." She turned to the others, her eyes softening. "But you were not alone in suspicion. Mr. Finch, your nervousness and knowledge of the passage made you a candidate. The tweed scrap by the garden door, the sketch of the globe in your notebook, they pointed to you. But your fear, I think, was of losing your place, not of guilt. Like young Tommy in the village, who trembled when accused of stealing apples he only admired." Harold exhaled, his shoulders slumping with relief, though his eyes remained wary. "Lady Beatrice," Miss Marple continued, "your charm and curiosity were disarming, but the pearl bead in the study and the silk thread in the hall suggested you'd been near. Your questions about the lock, noted by the maid, hinted at interest, yet I believe you were merely nosy, like Mrs. Carter's cousin, who pried into secrets for gossip, not gain." Lady Beatrice's laugh was brittle, but she nodded, her fingers relaxing on her bracelet. "And Dr. Morrow," Miss Marple said, her gaze settling on the scholar, "your sketches of the globe and the study's layout, the wax on your cuff, the paper scrap with meridian, They suggested a plan. But your motive was knowledge, not theft. Like Miss Elspeth's librarian friend, who hoarded books for study, you coveted the globe's secrets, not its price. The brass button in the garden was yours, perhaps dropped while sketching, but not a thief's mark. Dr. Morrow's lips parted, then closed, a faint flush on her cheeks as she nodded. Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm, the click a quiet underscore to her words. The trap, set with the Colonel's map, was the final stitch. Mr. Crane could not resist, and the globe was found in his bag, confirming his guilt. The passage, the candle, the crate, they were his tools, but the manor's clues betrayed him. She looked at Crane, her eyes kind but unyielding. Greed, Mr. Crane, is a poor companion, like Mr. Hodges's stolen coins, hidden but found because of a careless trace. Crane's defiance crumbled, and he sighed, his voice low. I saw my chance, he admitted. The globe was too perfect, the passage too easy. I thought I could slip it to London, sell it quietly. Holt was ready to pay. He shook his head, his charm gone. I underestimated you, Miss Marple. The Colonel's face reddened, but he held his tongue, his gratitude evident in his nod to Miss Marple. You've done it, ma'am, he said. The globe's back, and the scoundrel's caught. I'm in your debt. Miss Marple smiled, tucking her knitting away. No debt, Colonel. The truth is its own reward, like a well-knitted scarf. She rose, her pocket lighter now as she handed her clues. The pearl bead, silk thread, cufflink, brass button, paper scrap, splinter, hair, tweed scrap, map, glass bead, green paint fleck, and brass screw to Sergeant Gibbs. For your records, Sergeant, they tell the story better than I could. As the constables led Crane away, the room exhaled, the tension easing like a storm passing. Harold, Lady Beatrice, and Dr. Morrow murmured their thanks, their faces a mix of relief and chagrin. Miss Marple stepped into the hall, the manor's silence now a comfort rather than a challenge. The vanished antique globe was restored, its secrets laid bare, and the manor could sleep again. She thought of the village fete, where a lost ribbon had been found because someone noticed a child's muddy shoes. Small things, she knew, made all the difference. With a quiet nod to herself, Miss Marple made her way to her room, her work done, her mind already turning to the next pattern waiting to be unraveled.